day everyone, this is Nemesis, and today we are going to take a look at the long overdue updated version of the WvW build. The reason I did not release this video as soon as I planned, besides the fact that I have a personal life and lately I had a lot of stuff I had to deal with, you guys know I'm trying to always bring quality over quantity, and every time I release a new video I want to make it better than the previous one, just better quality. I'm slowly moving towards 10,000 subscribers, and a lot of you guys already become really skilled necromancers under my guidance, and some of you were already really good necromancers, just improved a bit based on my experience, based on my my guides. So in order to be able to come out and teach and bring something new and improve upon what I previously taught you guys, I needed to feel confident that I have mastered this WvW experience. So I went on a private WvW marathon for like 5 days. The build I made quite easy, quite fast, wasn't a problem, but I wanted to test it out. I wanted to properly give it a test. So after 5 days, 400 GB of recorded information and around 100 clips, I finally have the footage, and I feel confident and I feel ready to make a video in which I teach you guys something even greater. And besides, I took a long time to make this video, but it's going to be used as a reference in the future, because half of the video is going to be about principles, metas, and a lot of really important things in my eye. They are even more important than the actual build. If you get to understand why these decisions and what conditions they satisfy, how to do it, why to do it, and what to do, that's just more important than the details of actually this trait instead of that trait. Of course, you can just copy me if you want. There's going to be a menu you can skip through, but it's not recommended. It's far more important to understand PvP, to understand WvW. In this video I'm not going to explain the class mechanics. I've did that in great details in my PvE related videos. I have 3 extremely detailed builds. If you want, you can check those out. There are going to be some annotations. So we are going to take a look at the build overview. Then we are going to break down PvP. This is creation step 1. Then we are going to take a look at the current WvW meta. This is creation step 2. Then we are going to have a small discussion regarding what it means to be a roamer and what it means to be roaming. Then we are going to take a look at the build damage rotation and playstyle, and after we have understood all of these steps, we can very simply select weapons, utilities, traits, the gear and the stats, also some final notes to wrap things up. Before we go into the build overview, there are a few very important things that you need to know. I've seen a lot of threads on the forums. I've had dozens, hundreds maybe of comments on my YouTube channel, whispers, private messages. Everyone seems to be looking for a class that has a build that can win in a fight versus multiple opponents, preferably at the same skill level. There's a very fundamental problem here. If, let's say, a class X with the build X is stronger, is greater than the class Y, T and Z using Y, T and Z builds, then the class X is going to get nerfed. If the class X is not going to get nerfed in a relatively small amount of time, then the other classes will go like, wait a minute, this is not right. We are struggling over here, and here comes X with his X build, and he owns all of us without any chance of countering him. So let's make class X with the build X. As the saying goes, if you can't beat them, join them. So the initial X is going to be faced now with multiple X's. So X now cannot be greater than X plus X plus X. Basically, if you have a thief that has a certain build that can kill multiple opponents at the same time, and the opponents have the same skill level, it's only a matter of time before everyone rolls a thief with that build. So one thief with one build cannot own 3 thieves with the same build at the same skill level. It simply cannot be done. It's basically primary logic. So then, for the sake of diversity, for the sake of having actual competition, for the sake of having proper gameplay, class X with the build X is going to get nerfed to balance things out. So having a build that can own multiple opponents at the same time at the same skill level is impossible. You can, however, have a build that can own multiple opponents with lower skill level, with improper builds. But the problem is, even if they are at half skill level than you, they have combined, they have double the amount of HP, they have double the amount of damage than you. Lower damage because they cannot play right, they are not as high skill as you, but still it gets exponentially harder. So if you're one player and you kill two opponents at the same time that are at half your skill level, if they add one more opponent, then they already should, in theory at least, be too much for you, because no matter how skilled you are in a competitive play where balance is actually what people strive for, you won't have the numbers, you simply won't have what it takes, not in terms of skill but in terms of your maximum potential that the character, that the build allows you to invest in a fight. So it's hard. There are classes that can do that, but there's a catch to that. Those classes fall under the category of roamer, as I call them, and they don't fight multiple opponents at the same time, not at the same skill level anyway. So what they do is they use different shortcuts to kill one player out of a small team and then they escape. And again, the thing is, they have to be lower in skill level, because if one player tries to single me out when I'm with my team, with my PvP team, that's just not going to happen, no matter how skilled that player is, no matter what class and what build he is using. If I'm with my friends, I would actually pay all my gold to someone that with one class can defeat me and two other members. It simply cannot be done. So you guys already heard me once or twice referring to players as bad players, lower skilled, casual players, even nubs. Well, I'm just going to say this right now because it's really important, and I want to be able to refer to players as bad or casuals or nubs because it's relevant. So there is nothing wrong with being a bad player, there's nothing wrong with being a casual player, there's nothing wrong with being a noob player in World v World. World v World is for everyone. Even if you're so bad of a player that even a Doliak trashes you around, you can still enter a Omega Golem, you can still follow a Zerg, and you can still press one button to slap a door on a keep. So don't be discouraged if you for some reason are unskilled, if you don't have time to play more than 2 hours a day, maybe you have a family, maybe you have 2 jobs and you just don't have the time to acquire the skill for whatever reason. World v World can still be for you. But in that case you are a bad player, you are a noob player, and you need to know how you can be beneficial towards achieving victory for your server. Even though you're bad, like I said, there's still stuff for you can do. You can go on a trebuchet, aim that way and press one button, not a problem. Also, some people might be mistaken for bad players. Some players might think their skill is so great because they just killed a few players. You have to take into consideration the fact that some people use what I call Zerg builds. It's not really a term yet in the World v World meta, but they already started appearing, and I predicted it would happen, and it does happen. Zerg builds are made to function in a big Zerg, depending on the World v World meta, depending on the Zerg size and movement pattern. Not just across the map, but also within themselves, but we'll get to that soon enough. Those kind of builds are not made for proper PvP, for real PvP. So if you manage to 1v1 and kill even 1v1, 1v2 some people, maybe they were bad, maybe they weren't bad, but had Zerg build and they were trying to get back to their Zergs. Another really important thing that you need to know, like I said, if you're a good player, if you're a bad player, you have a role in World v World, you have a place in World v World, there's something for you to do. So with that being said, it's really important to know that World v World, while it is a PvP environment, it's not about mindless slaughter. Doesn't really matter if you keep killing people solo or with Zerg, you keep killing, you achieve nothing. You don't get points, you don't get anything. You get some rewards, but it's minimal. That's not what WvW is about. WvW is about taking keeps, taking camps, taking castles. So of course the opposition is going to try to do the same thing, or stop you, or prevent you from taking their keeps. That's when the killing starts. As you can see, you have a castle that rewards like 35 points. You obviously need a really large group to obtain the castle, to lay siege to a castle, or prevent your castle from being taken by other people. But as you can see, it's not all about castle. It's also about supply camps and other smaller objectives. And doesn't matter if you have a castle, if the opposition has like 7 or 8 supply camps. As you can see, the points, the overall contribution owning can be achieved through multiple ways. A big Zerg is never going to be effective enough to take and to hold so many different supply camps, because by the time you reach all of those supply camps, smaller parties, really well made parties, are going to be able to move much swifter across the entire land, because they can be in multiple locations at the same time, and a Zerg simply cannot match that. So as you can see, we're already splitting into like team fights and Zerg fights. Team fights are more for taking smaller objectives that combined can topple the big objectives, but the small teams can never take the big objectives because they will get severely outnumbered. So it's about your contribution towards big Zergs or small team fights. 1v1 isn't going to do much to anyone, and no matter how many people you kill, like I said, they might be nabs, and that nab player can topple you when it comes to a siege fight, when it comes to a keep fight, because he's in a golem and you did not prepare accordingly to stop that golem. So keep all of this in mind, because it's really important further down. So as a build overview, it's about your contribution towards obtaining victory, your contribution towards the goal of War v World. Here's the thing, if you go with 100 people towards an objective, each one of those people has the potential of doing the same damage as you, or support, or defense, or whatever you do. So your contribution is going to be like 1%, around 1%, because you're surrounded by 99 people that have potentially the same value as you. Balance, remember. So it's about a fine balance between personal gain and personal contribution in a team fight and in a Zerg. So we see that we are going to be building towards personal contribution in a team fight or in a Zerg, because team fights and Zergs are important from different angles, and we need not forget about personal gain. But here's the thing, some people go on the flip side. Some people think that War v World is all about tagging. You go in a really big Zerg, you tag everything, and you wait for endless bags of loot to drop at your feet. So tell me guys, if everyone in your Zerg is just tagging, who's going to do the killing? That's what I want to know. So you will actually never get your loot. No matter how many people you tagged, if you don't kill them, no loot for you. So the first thing in mind must always be personal contribution. Secondly, personal gain, because if everyone has the mentality of personal contribution on top of personal gain, then everyone will get personal gain and personal contribution. If you have personal gain on top of personal contribution, at the end of the day no one is going to get anything, because all of you are going to be dead. So even though this was a much larger introduction than I originally planned on making, it was really important that you guys understand the basics. A lot of people don't even know this information, or they don't take it into consideration, so they go into War v World with the wrong mentality, then they search for builds with the wrong mentality, and then they use those builds for the wrong purposes. So it's like the worst thing you can do. And once we go through the PvP breakdown, the current War v World meta, and what it means to be roaming and what it means to be a roamer, you guys will see that the build will just create itself. These facts will always remain relevant. So the builds, no matter how much the traits are going to change in the future, the decision process is always going to be dependent on these facts. So the traits and the gear and everything is going to be just small variables that play on these principles. They simply satisfy certain conditions, and they simply form themselves in such a way to achieve certain goals, certain objectives. So it's going to be really beautiful. Besides, I have gathered a lot of WvW footage that I have to showcase somewhere, so might as well showcase it at the same time as I'm talking the principles that are so very important. So in my opinion, compared to the PvE guides that I previously done, where I just have a concept, then I provide proof of concept, I showcase some numbers, and then I demonstrate, you don't really need to demonstrate that you do insane amount of damage a million times. If you do it once or twice, it's enough to demonstrate that the proof of concept, the stats and math are actually true in reality. Mobs are still going to be mobs. But when you go to players, when it's about players, showcasing me owning a few people a few times, that's not nearly enough. You need to have dozens of duels in which you basically can understand an average of the WvW environment. How are you going to perform on average? If you try to match my mentality, my traits, my playstyle, my everything, you are going to do on average like you see in dozens of small demonstrations. Okay, then moving on, we are going to break down the PvP system, since WvW is a PvP environment, because there's a lot of very important lessons to be learned. So PvP, player versus player, your objective is to kill your opponent before the opponent kills you. So the most important thing you need to know, whatever you are trying to do to your opponent, the opponent will try to do to you. Whatever you're thinking of doing, whatever you plan, the opponent is planning something similar, because this is a balanced game and the opponent has access theoretically to everything you have access. So to kill your opponent you need to do damage. You have direct damage and condition damage. The conditions can be further branched into damaging conditions and forms of CC, as in crowd controls. So damaging is bleeding, confusion, burning, poison, torment, and fear can be turned into a damaging condition. As the form of CC, you have cripple, chill, blind, vulnerability, weakness, poison, and immobilize. These CCs are used to gain an upper hand. They are used to ensure that your damage goes through, or are used to prevent damage. These different forms of CC are here to ensure that you gain an upper hand. On top of all the damage and all the forms of CC, we also have control effects, which are different than CCs because are a bit more radical. So we have stun, daze, knockdown, launch, pull, push, float, sink, and fear. Fear, even though it's a condition, I placed it under control effects because it acts as a control effect and gets counter as a control effect, and is also more severe. It's a more severe form of CC. It disables your opponent. Okay, so these are our offensive tools. So in order for the PvP to not be a spam fest, whoever can smack their keyboard faster with their face wins. You have defensive counters, so it's not all about damage, it's a mixture between damage, CCs, control effects, and the defensive counters towards all of these. So versus direct damage, you have high armor, which directly mitigates direct damage. You have weakness, which also mitigates direct damage, and you have protection, which also mitigates direct damage in different ways. Armor basically is the standard, weakness is a debuff, protection is a buff. So debuff for the enemy, protection for you. Plus, all forms of direct damage can be countered with control effects. If you stun or daze or knockdown or push or pull or whatever, if you fear your opponent, he's not going to do any more direct damage to you. So, on top of these, you can do different forms of CC like cripple, chill, blind, but those are situational. Cripple and chill gives you the ability to kite your opponent a bit. Blind works on melee as well as range characters. A blind is a blind, a hit that misses, a hit that misses. Anyway, I won't get too much into this in this video. So versus condition damage, you need high health, because condition damage, as we've learned in the PvE guide where I explain class mechanics, condition damage goes through armor, goes through protection, goes directly into health. So that's why you need high health, because high health is one of the very effective ways to mitigate condition damage. If you add a lot of armor, a bleeding tick of 130 is still going to hit for 130. On top of that, you have cleansing spells. different cleansing spells which remove conditions and prevents them from doing damage over time. They need to stay on the target for a long period of time in order to be effective, and if you remove that, you basically cut the damage in half or whatever. Also, the condition damage can be countered with control effects, of course. If you stun someone, he's not going to put any more conditions on you, obviously. Okay, versus CCs and control effects. Versus CCs, since they are conditions, you have cleansing spells. Just like for the damage, every condition can be cleansed with cleansing spells. That includes immobilize. A lot of people make this mistake. They think immobilize is a control effect, but in truth it's a condition. So you can use all the stun breakers you want on immobilize, you're not going to get demobilized or whatever. At the same time, control effects like stun days and the swords are not going to go anywhere unless you use a stun breaker or prevent that control effect with stability. So as you can see, it's already starting to form. Because of the way the game was designed, you have something to think about. It's a beautiful dance of having enough damage and getting the upper hand with conditions and having enough defensive counters to counter the opponent's direct damage and conditions and control effects. So a proper build needs to have a bit of everything, or if you have too much of something and you lack in something else, you need to play in such a way that you cover your weakness. If you're vulnerable to a lot of CCs, you need to not get into situations when you're going to get CC'd a lot. If you're vulnerable to condition damage, you need to stay away from things that put a lot of condition damage on you. If you're vulnerable to direct damage, you need to stay away from places that do a lot of direct damage. Basically that's the mentality, that's the correct mentality that you must have. But the thing is, you need to have a bit of everything. Don't go without any cleansing spells, don't go without any armor. Have a bit of everything so you're prepared for any and all situations, because you're dealing with players, you're not dealing with stupid retarded mobs. Last thing I'm going to say, all damage can be prevented by block, evade, stealth and invulnerability effects. But there's a catch to all of them. So you use block to counter incoming direct damage, incoming stacks of conditions, but there are skills that counter your counter. Basically, there are skills that go through block, so there are skills to counter the counter. So you can see how this system becomes more and more complex as we move on. You have evade. Evade works like block, but there's a different catch to evade. When you dodge, you perform an evade attack. Also, there are a lot of skills that have the evade function in them. So evade basically stops incoming direct damage, stops further stacking of conditions on you, but, and here's the thing, if you evade and you hit a target that has retaliation, you're going to get damage. You cannot evade retaliation damage. So, you counter me with an evade and I counter your counter with retaliation. So, as you can see, the system is really beautifully designed. Also, stealth is a really controversial thing. Stealth is very effective as well as invulnerability effects. Stealth basically counters everything. You go in stealth, you stop all damage. You cannot be damaged if your opponent doesn't see you. But the thing is, all the conditions that are on you when you go into stealth still remain on you. Basically, stealth stops all new damage from getting to you. But all the damage that was already there is there. Basically, the only counter you have to stealth is predict where the enemy is going after its stealth and use a lot of spells that don't require a target at that location, at the location you think the enemy is. You can use CCs, you can use everything you want, but again, it's you have to predict where the enemy is. That's the only counter. Last but not least, we have invulnerability effects. This is a very potent defensive counter to all forms of damage, both direct and condition damage, to all forms of CC and control effects. It basically makes you invulnerable to any of these while invulnerability is in place. The catch here is that while you are invulnerable to all new forms of direct damage, condition damage, CCs and control effects, it does not cleanse old conditions that are present on you, old control effects that are present on you, unless the skill that includes the invulnerability effect also has maybe a stun break, maybe a cleansing spell, and so on. So as you can see, this is turning out to be a really complex system, and you can see the beauty and the genius in the design of the PvP system. It's a never-ending basically counter versus counter, damage versus damage. Such a beautiful design. So the lesson here is the fact that you need to chain attacks, you need to do a combo, you need to always be aware of what the enemy can do and counter that. You can initiate with some damage, he's going to counter by doing more damage or by using a defensive counter. Then you counter his counter, if he does more damage you counter that damage, and you try to gain the upper hand with some conditions, with some control effects. It's all about chain attacks, it's all about combos, it's all about what the opponent does. So especially when you're dealing with conditions, because conditions take a little while longer to do the damage, you definitely need a lot of CCs when dealing with the conditions. That kind of makes sense why conditions got damaging conditions and forms of CCs in terms of conditions, because they kind of have to go hand in hand, especially since they are spells to cleanse it. Because otherwise you just put condition, someone is going to cleanse it, you put condition, someone is going to cleanse it, you stop the cleanse with a control effect, they counter your counter with stability, with stun breakers, and so on. I'm not going to go further into this. So we know it's all about combos, but it's also about the circumstance in which you can use that combo. These are the principles of PvP, but there are some circumstances in which some combos are not functional. So for that we need to put it into perspective. We need to analyze the circumstance. We need to be moving towards the meta of the WvW environment. We understand the core of the circumstances in general, but now we need to be more specific and build towards a specific type of circumstance. So before we go into the WvW meta, I'm going to say something very important. Every time I hear a player or someone ask me, can I use this build in PvE and WvW and PvP and whatever, I just want to facepalm. You remember one of the first things I've said when we reached to breaking down PvP? Mobs are not players. The mob is not going to have access to all of these skills, and most importantly, a monster, a mob, is never going to try to counter you intuitively. A mob is not going to go through the thought process that I just went through, and the most skilled players, not necessarily the most skilled, but many players, even if they don't realize it, do this process. Mobs don't. And mobs are not so complex either. They don't have access to all of these. They don't have access to the tools of countering, and they don't counter, because for countering you need to be intuitive or highly fast, which is sort of cheating. Because if the only way to counter fear is by having immunity or some sort of weird mechanic, or as soon as you press the button, the server analyzes it in real time and it counters you instantly. So that's another form, not necessarily of cheating, but to compensate for the fact that the mobs are not intuitive. They don't really react to you. They cannot, unless we have really good AI, and I don't think we have such AIs in commercial games. So please, for the love of God, stop using the same builds for fighting players which are intuitive and high in complexity, and monsters which are dumb, and they compensate for that with overpowering mechanics such as huge health, huge damage, huge numbers, huge something. So that's just how it is. I'm not going to say this again. I'm just not going to answer any more whispers that have that questions, honestly. The only people that are not going to agree with me are those people that have managed to kill other players using PvE builds. But, like I said, some people have Zerg builds, some people are nubs. There's nothing wrong with either of these. Each one of them has their uses. Or it's the other way around. People use PvP builds in a PvE environment. In a PvE environment where a mob is really stupid, he's not going to counter your damage, you can focus all your build into doing damage, or all your build into tanking, or your build into support. You're not going to get punished. Also, from a perspective of a conditionmancer, you can really build towards stacking 25 stacks of bleeding on the target, because the target is not going to dispel is not going to cleanse those bleeds, then put some invulnerability so you cannot put more bleeds, then stun you, then go into misform and jump off a cliff. That's not going to happen. In reality, most players don't allow 25 stacks of bleeding on them because they don't have overpowering mechanics. The game is more or less balanced. They don't have 500,000 HP. If they allow 25 stacks of bleeding on them, they will be dead in 3 seconds, because we all know from the PvE guide that 25 stacks of bleeding equals to about 3,500 DPS. With fear damage is about, it's enough. With the auto attacks, with other sources, it's enough to go over 4,000 DPS. That's 4 seconds, 4,000 DPS, that's 16,000 damage. There's a lot of classes with a lot of builds that don't even have that much. So if they are going to allow 25 stacks of bleeding, and besides you don't instantly get to 25 stacks of bleeding, so by the time you get to 25, the enemy is already at half HP. So if you get to 25 and he lets them stay there for 2 more seconds, that's good night. So let's take a look at the current World v World meta. You have to remember, all the information I have told you so far is going to stay relevant indefinitely, because I have spoken in principle. I have talked about the core, the fundamental structure of the PvP design. Unless the game gets scrapped and we have a totally new system, this will remain relevant for many months, maybe years to come, and will always help you make the right decision. As for the World v World meta, like I said in the menu, it's the current World v World meta, because I'm predicting some changes and we are going to update this video as the changes progress. So immediately as I say the World v World, everyone is going to think Zerg. How is this build, how is this guide going to help me in a Zerg? So before we can answer that, we need to understand what a Zerg is, how it functions, how it moves across the map and within itself, and only then we will be able to build towards countering a Zerg or counter a Zerg at a meta level. So if we stay and analyze the shape of a Zerg, they are mostly comet shape. There are a lot of people in the front, and in the back we have some stranglers. This all started when a small group of people reached a castle gate and they were hitting the door with a club for like 20 days, and then they realized we need more people. So they got more people and they realized they were really effective against fewer people. So those fewer people got even more people. So they keep getting more and more people, but in the beginning, 8 months ago, they were not as compact. Meanwhile, the meta has changed and they become more and more compact, because AoE damage can only hit 5 targets. So if you have 200 people on top of you and you have AoE raining down on you, even though it might seem that you took a meteor to the face, actually that meteor might have hit other people. So you're safe in a Zerg. The more compact the Zerg is, the less people think, the less of a chance it is for you to get hit. And that's actually true. That works. Also, if you fall in the front lines, since there are so many people, it's hard to be the target of a finishing move or a finishing skill. And as the Zerg progresses forward, the stranglers that are in the back can rally you. So basically the front of the Zerg will always have fresh troops supporting them. I previously mentioned stranglers in the back. Not everyone moves at the same speed, not everyone wants to be in the front. Some people do range damage and they think, why the fuck would I be in the front and take all the damage like all the other noobs when I can stay over here, tag everything, and basically get my rewards. So the fact that they do this is really stupid, but it's still beneficial because they get to revive the down players that remain within the Zerg. Another thing that this format achieves, they have a lot of damage per square mile. They have a lot of damage per square mile, and we know PvP is about comboing, doing combos. Condition damage needs a bit of time to kick in, put some conditions, and then use epidemic, because condition damage, we know from the PvE guide, is actually meant to be played for AoE. So you have to stack some conditions before you epidemic, and that requires time to perform your combo. time that you might not have, because the knobs over there, which are about 200, all of those 200 knobs are going to press one button, and the damage per square mile per second in front of them, which is where you are, is going to be so insane that you don't have the time, you literally don't have the time to do your combo, to counter, to do anything. So basically, a Zerg is all about being as compact as possible, so you take as little damage as possible, and even if you sustain casualties, it's hard to finish off their casualties, to prevent them from recuperating within themselves. They are really, really strong as an offensive force. And they have a concept, I mean, they should have a concept, and some people have this concept. They have a concept of, let me get into character, something like, on my mark, everyone do a lot of damage that way. So basically, you don't need to target. If you have 200 players versus 200 players, because of the high mortality rate, you're going to spend more time clicking on extra targets than you're going to be attacking. And by the time you find a target that is within your line of sight and did not die in the next 2 seconds, so you can spend 4 seconds on the target to do your combo, yeah, he's dead. So you keep switching targets. So the effective way of doing damage in a Zerg is basically non-targetable attacks. That's offensively non-targetable attacks, defensively stacking. It's really dumb, it's really stupid, and even though it's dumb and stupid, people haven't realized this for such a long time, and now they have. And they don't, even now they don't use Zerg builds, not all of them, but basically they follow the principle of everyone do a lot of damage that way on my mark. If you're going to get hit, you're going to die anyway, because you're not going to get hit by a player that does a combo. You're going to get hit by 200 players that press one button. You don't need to worry about most of the counters. You can play almost PvE style. You do a lot of damage that way, as much damage as possible, and you pray to God you don't get hit. If you get hit, you die, and someone is going to revive you. That's how a Zerg is sustaining itself. That's how a Zerg is gaining ground. If you try to counter this by trying to flank, by trying to stay spread out a little bit, you're going to lose. Why? Because you have less defensive numbers to soak up the damage, and less offensive damage per second per square mile. So a lot of the time you see that really compact Zergs wipe out other uncompact Zergs. Well, that's simple, because every square mile the compact Zerg outnumbers the uncompact Zergs like 20 to 1. So the compact Zerg will always wipe the uncompact Zerg. So since we know that the condition build is made to combo, is made to fight AoE, it requires, condition damage requires a bit of time to kick in. This doesn't look so good. This doesn't look so good when it comes to Zerg. Of course, if they break up, if the Zerg breaks up, you can fight multiple opponents and they're really bad, so blah blah blah. Yeah, I know. You can defend the guard tower if you're people, especially if you're skilled. As you can see in the images, a lot of knobs are trying to get the guard tower, and we're like 5 or 7, I don't even know, and they retreat. The thing is, they were bad, they were knobs. I'm one person, we are 7 people in total, and they have, I don't know, 50. Every one of those 50 people has a chance to pull us down, and we are going to stay near the side and eventually be pulled down, so we can do sustained pressure, so we stop the attack. So if we don't want to get pulled down, we need to stop DPS. As bad as it is that we have to do DPS to cover 50 people, like 5 times the amount of HP we have, so the damage has to be up the roof, we still manage to push them back. But they will come back in stronger numbers, and they can just stay outside our range, our normal attacks range, use a lot of siege weapons, and we have to go outside and stop their trebuchet from sieging us, because once the gate is down, there's no walls to hide behind. So basically it's going to be a 7 versus 50, and we are going to get just annihilated. So what do you do then? Well, as a conditionmancer, a very effective way of doing AoE damage is the way in which you don't really need to be a conditionmancer, you don't need to be anything. Just really effective AoE damage. So like I said, even if you're a knob, even if you don't have a build, you can be more effective Think about it, I'm using a catapult and doing a lot of damage at huge range that way. If I was standing near the wall, I would have lower damage at lower range with higher risk. So why would I do anything like that? You guys have to understand the correct mentality here. So the condition build isn't really for big Zergs because of how the meta is, how Zergs function. In big Zergs you need to do a lot of damage on command in a certain direction, preferably without requiring a target, because like I said, players are going to die so fast you won't be able to click anything. So this is not proper PvP, this is not about PvP, this is World v World, and needed to be treated accordingly. So you guys know me, I don't usually leave you guys without a solution. So in part of the video I have a build that satisfies the condition of the current World v World meta in terms of Zerg. But there's another way to counter, big Zergs. There's another way to counter big Zergs without directly engaging them. And you guys remember in the beginning I spoke about the fact that you take a big castle, and if you take 7 or 6 camps you basically have more points and you can achieve victory that way. Well, here's the thing, here's the very important thing. A big Zerg is going to move around and taking camps as they please. A smaller party, they can take a camp as well, no big deal. 5 smaller parties which combined are smaller than a big Zerg, they could never engage the big Zerg directly because they just don't have the numbers. But if they split up and roam around the map and take camps, the big Zerg is not going to have enough map presence, enough movement speed to be in all places at the same time. So you don't have to fight them directly when you meet them. You take their camps and you keep harassing the Zerg with objectives. You take their objectives and the Zerg is going to move powerlessly across the map until they are forced to split up. And something really beautiful comes to mind: divide et impera. Divide et impera. Divide and conquer. So as soon as the Zerg splits up, if you are built towards team fights and you don't have a Zerg build, you're going to encounter a lot of people that are effective in a Zerg and have Zerg builds. Those Zerg builds are going to get crushed by proper builds, by proper PvP builds. Or you have a lot of people that played in a Zerg for such a long time that they are nubs, they don't know anything else. So they will get crushed as well. Or people use normal PvP builds in big Zergs, which makes the Zerg weaker. If I have a Zerg with full Zerg builds and I meet a Zerg with proper PvP builds, then my Zerg is going to be stronger than their Zerg by default, as long as we clump up. So we are going to achieve a meta victory. We are going to achieve a victory without directly engaging the overpowering Zerg. So not only are we going to take the camps, we are going to harass them so much that their efforts in sustaining the keep, because you know, repairing a keep door requires resources which they no longer have, we weaken their effort. So eventually more and more people are going to realize this, and eventually they will move on from just tagging and they will move on from just Zerging as soon as they realize that only tagging doesn't work, only Zerging doesn't work, using bad builds with the wrong mentality doesn't work. So it's going to be sort of a counter play, action and reaction, counter of a counter of a counter, but at a grander scale. So basically now we understand how Zerg functions, why it functions like this, and how to counter it in 2 methods. The conditionmancer build does not work for direct countering. However, it works for indirect countering. You can still obtain victory by doing proper PvP at a smaller scale and taking objectives so fast that they can't really counter you. There is no chance to be, there is no way that the big Zerg can be on the entire map at the same time. So that leaves us roaming. So now you guys are going to think, a roamer build. So let's understand real quick what it means to be a roamer. A roamer is a class that has a build that can do this. Basically, no matter how many people try to kill that class, if the player spots them in time, there's nothing you can do about it. So basically they have a chance to kill a few of you or take a camp or take something like that, and then they're gone and you cannot stop them. So basically not all classes have this ability. The most effective way of harassing a Zerg as a roamer is take their camp and go into stealth. So stealth is the biggest roaming tool there is, and the necromancer doesn't have stealth. So yeah, in the beginning I mentioned that some people seem to be fighting a lot of players at the same time and winning. No, they simply are roamers. They have the ability to escape any amount of people and single a target out, focus it down, and then escape. As you can see in this image, it's quite unpleasant to get hit that hard and then vanish forever. Again, that works only on bad players. As you can see, this thief does a huge amount of damage and tries multiple times and fails. Even though to be a roamer, in my book at least, you need to have the ability to escape any and all Zergs, that doesn't mean you cannot be roaming. And I don't mean just walking around the map. That's, yeah, I'm guessing that technically it is roaming, but it's not proper roaming. You have to remember, you don't really need to do this alone. And remember what I said when I was breaking down PvP. You try to have a bit of everything, and you try to stay away from your weaknesses or compensate for that weaknesses. You need to compensate. So as you can see on screen, I'm doing quite a bit of damage, and for the past 40 minutes I've been killing people quite nicely, I would say. And I was doing 1v1, 1v2s, 1v3s even a few 1v4s, and I managed to kill 2 people. What do you think will happen if I move around with a mesmer, let's say? Not only do I do AoE damage, and we know epidemic can spread all conditions. If we go with a condition mesmer, for example, we will have confusions, and that confusion I can spread. So basically 2 necromancers and 2 mesmers can easily kill a team of, let's say, 7-8, especially if they're skilled. And if more than 7-8 people come, then you can vanish. So that's how you become a roamer. You have a roaming build, yet you're not really a roamer, but it's really effective when another class compensates for you. And you compensate for that class by having huge AoE damage. So you bring the huge AoE damage. I'm not saying we have more AoE damage, I'm just saying that we take advantage of their damage as well. So basically we do have more AoE damage than them, as long as they are with us. So the fact that I'm in a group with a mesmer, he provides us with the roaming ability, and I provide us with the damage ability to fighting versus multiple. So that's how you do it. That's how you do it. So basically, if you have enough damage, you can then focus on getting defensive counters. And in WvW, like I said, the skill level on average isn't that high. So people are not going to focus you so much. And it's not like top 500 tournament play, where people are really skilled at focusing people down. No. Here you are not going to get focused so much, and this will stay relevant. So now we understand WvW, we understand PvP, we understand what role we need to take as a conditionmancer. So now finally, after a lot of minutes of me talking, we finally know all the conditions that need to be satisfied in order to properly own in a WvW environment. So the build is going to create itself. Like I said, it's not really a problem. I'm going to tell you my version, but most importantly, you are going to know when to use it, how to use it, and why to use it to have maximum effectiveness. So when it comes to the damage rotation and playstyle, the thing is, there isn't really much of a damage rotation. Mobs are not players, so you can't really stack really fast on them without expecting something to happen, some sort of counter or something like that. And we also know that we are not going to get to 25 stacks of bleeding on the target, because no one is going to allow that. So it's not worth it to invest more than half condition duration, half bleeding duration, to stack an average of half of 25 around 12. But there are certain shortcuts. there's a concept that I call burst stacking. They are a combination of skills that not only stack more than your normal 12 stacks in a shorter period of time, since you don't have to sustain that, you just have to get the stacks up, and that combo, that particular way of burst stacking is going to include counters to different types of damage and control effects and anti-control effects. So I'm going to display on screen what you need to do, and I'm going to get into more details on all of these when I get to the SPVP tournament PvP video. For now, this is more or less what you need to know. You need to have a starting point, and this is a really good starting point for you. For World v World small encounters, all you have to do is understand that the notion of burst stacking exists, and try to use my version for a while until you can make your own. But you have to remember, this will not always go as smooth. Enemies are going to counter you. So yeah, I included Epidemic in the rotation as well. You don't have to do it at the end. I just did it like a chain control effect, counter, heavy burst stacking effect with Epidemic at the end. This is my preferred way, but you can find your own way. And if you don't have a way yet, you can use mine without any problems. So now it's finally time to draw the line, since we know everything, every single condition, every single requirement that needs to be fulfilled in order for you to own, in order for you to properly own in a World v World environment, in order for you to obtain victories. So let's see what weapons we can use in our conditionmancer build. This will be quite fast, so basically we need to stack condition damage and have a lot of CC to back condition damage up. Bleeding stacking from Scepter, bleeding stacking plus cripple. This skill is going to synergize with the rest of the build later on. Offhand dagger, transfer 3 conditions to your target on successful attack. This will reduce our vulnerability to condition type damage. Bleeding plus weakness, this further increases our damage while reducing our vulnerability to direct type damage. So we have counter to direct damage, counter to condition damage, and kiting capabilities to further increase our damaging potential. Everything is condition related, so we are on the right path. Secondary weapon staff, this is a combo finisher and it stacks a bit of life force. Again, life force stacking is going to be used later because of the traits. This is bleeding plus regeneration. Regeneration is a healing effect, and I've discussed that this is the way you can revert the damage that already has been done, plus bleeding of course. This is chill and poison. Chill and poison fall under the category of CC conditions and are used to gain the upper hand, as I've discussed in breaking down PvP. Putrid Mark, inscribe a mark that transfer condition from allies to foes when triggered. This resembles very well with Deathly Swarms. So far we have 2 defensive counters against conditions and 1 against direct damage, but these 2 marks combined, this is a combo field poison, this is a combo finisher blast, these 2 marks combined generate weakness. So we have 2 ways of dealing with conditions and 2 ways of dealing with direct damage. And last but not least, AoE Fear. Fear, like I said, is a control effect. Even though it's a condition, it acts like a control effect and can be traded towards doing damage. So Fear can be both an offensive damage skill and a defensive tool, both against condition and direct damage, as I have discussed in the breaking down PvP category in this video. So these are the weapons. The slot skills, utilities, are more or less easy to decide as well. We have consume condition, feast on your condition, gain health for each one consumed. So now we have 3 ways of dealing with conditions. We have 3 ways of dealing with conditions, and since 2 of them become a really potent offensive ability, and the third one is basically a really strong defensive ability, we are sort of set against conditions. We don't really need more condition removal than we already have, especially if it's used wisely, if it's used to counter and not used just to not wasted. So we can focus more on getting more armor and be more defensive towards direct type damage, because conditions, we have them covered. So we know that some people are going to counter everything you are doing, especially the CCs. They are going to counter our strongest offensive ability. Our strongest offensive ability is Fear, for it is a damaging ability and it is also a control effect. So it's really strong. So some people are going to use stun breakers and then put stability to prevent us from comboing. You know, I spoke a lot about comboing and what needs to happen. So in order for us to continue the combo, we are going to use Corrupt Boon. Corrupt Boon is a must, because without using Corrupt Boon, the enemy can counter us in such a way that they break our combo and our chances of winning drop dramatically. So Corrupt Boon is insanely good for corrupting stability. Whenever you corrupt stability, not only do you turn their stability into an extra Fear, which does damage and acts as a control effect. Basically, we gain some breathing time to heal or to offensively continue our combo, but removes the stability, so we can add more Fears or knockdowns or whatever else we are going to do. Throughout this video I have demonstrated why this build is going to be used as a roaming build and how you can achieve victory through roaming and what it means to be properly roaming. So we need to be fighting AoE. So this is an AoE, this is an AoE, these are all AoEs, so why not get even more AoEs with Epidemic? This is really just Corrupt Boon and Epidemic is a must whenever you plan on using this build in the correct way that I have taught you. So the last utility, Spectral Wall, basically is Fear plus protection. Like I said, we need more defensive capabilities to counter direct damage, since we have conditions covered. So the fact that we get protection and on top of protection we get Fear, this is again a double-edged skill. We get some defensive tools and the enemy gets a bit more frustrated by our offensive capabilities that are all in one. So Fear on Spectral Wall is insanely good, especially when you're being followed. Whenever you're being followed, since the Spectral Wall can hit more than 5 targets, it doesn't have a 5 target limitation, especially at the skill level in 1v1, they are going to get so messed up by this. Last but not least, I use the Golem Charge. Not only it's another knockdown and you've seen the combo, the standard combo, it's really useful. It's a form of continuous damage, it's a form of cripple, it's a form of CC, and it has meaning later on when we go towards the gear. So the traits, you guys saw that we have enough damage. We have enough damage, so we are going to focus more on making sure our damage that is enough is not going to be countered. We are not going to get countered. If you get countered, or worse, if you die, you don't get to do that enough damage. So we are going to go into curses, and we have Weakening Shroud. Weakening Shroud basically casts Enfeebling Blood when entering Death Shroud, so that's some bleeding and weakness. So we have weakness, double weakness, triple weakness. We can almost keep weakness on the opponent at all times, and when I had the duel versus that thief that was hitting really hard, those are the kind of thieves that sometimes manage to do a 22k hit on people, if you guys remember throughout the video I have demonstrated. So weakness is going to reduce that damage insanely much, and you saw I also used this in the shortcut, in the damaging rotation, which is the shortcut into stacking huge amount of bleeds on the target in a very short period of time. It's a burst, it's not a sustain, it's a form of burst stacking. So you weaken your opponent while burst stacking. Really important trait. I wouldn't go anywhere without it. Terror. Fear deals damage, it deals additional, and it deals an additional 50% damage if the target has another condition on them. Like I said, the Fear, which is a condition that acts like a control effect, can be turned into an offensive weapon. So it's at the same time offensive and defensive. Just because of this trait, we again have a double-edged weapon. We can go further into curses and get Withering Precision, apply 5 seconds of weakness on critical hits, or Lingering Curse. Lingering Curse increases your bleeding duration. but we know we don't really need more bleeding duration than half of the possible maximum for the necromancer, which is 133%. So if we are around 70%, 60%, especially since you've seen the shortcut to burst bleed stacking, we don't really need more condition duration, because it's going to get wasted since people are going to counter you, and if they don't counter you, they're so bad that it doesn't even matter. So that's not good for us. And again, with turning precision, we already have three ways of adding weakness. We don't want to overstack weakness, we don't want to overstack bleeds. We need to focus on countering the counter to bleed stacking. So our bleeds, as many as you've seen they are, don't get removed, because it doesn't matter if you have 100 stacks of bleeding on the target if they get removed after 1 second. So you are not going to go further into curses. We move on down into death magic, and we have lose the condition whenever you enter Death Shroud. Sometimes people dodge the Deathly Swarm, people block the Putrid Mark or dodge through the mark. Sometimes we get caught with consume conditions on cooldown, and people want to move in for the kill and they put some immobilize and immediately go into Death Shroud just in case someone gets smart. So lose the condition whenever you enter Death Shroud. That's another condition removal every 10 seconds, which is just perfect. When disabled by stun daze, knock back, knock down, sink, float, fear, or launch nearby foes fear you. This effect can only trigger once every 90 seconds. Like I said, in big zergs, people don't focus as well. They tend to focus if they see you're the target, but as soon as you sort of counter them severely, they go for the nearest target, especially since the area of fighting is much larger. Compared to SPVP, you don't have to stay in a certain point, because otherwise you lose. So it's going to be, in team fights, they're going to spread a bit, they're not going to chase so much. So if this big counter hits them every 90 seconds, I mean, if you're not going to win a team fight in 90 seconds, you're not going to win the team fight. So this breaks the focus. This breaks the focus severely. And not only that, if by the time they reach you, they had some conditions on you, this energizes with terror, because they take additional fear damage if they have conditions. So since you're going to fear in AoE, you can basically double fear AoE, and since this has an initial duration of 2 seconds, can last up to 4 seconds. 4 seconds of basically countering their focus fire. That's just ridiculous. They may use a stun breaker, put stability so further fear doesn't appear on them, then you use some corrupt boon. Like I said, always counter the counter, the counter, the counter is a never-ending chess play in real time. As long as you have enough damage, you need to make sure that the damage is done. It doesn't matter if you do 1,000,000 damage. If someone sneezes and kills you from a mile away, you're never going to do your damage. So Reaper's Protection is highly recommended to break combat, to gain the upper hand, to counter, to survive focus fire, and basically just AoE kill. And since this can go up to like 4 seconds, you might get smart with that and use Epidemic and fear some more. So that's one AoE fear, second AoE fears, it won't last long but doesn't matter, and third AoE fear. So that's a lot of AoE fear. Your contribution to a team is going to be highly effective. Okay, move 25% faster while in Death Shroud. I use this because some people tend to run away, and I don't want them to run away. So sometimes instead of Spectral Wall I use Signet of the Locust, move around the map. But if you're going to run, like I said, with a roaming party, you're not going to need that. But sometimes you see someone that is trying to escape and you want to go after them, and the best way to go after them is like a bit of chilling, some dark path, a bit of torment with immobilize at the end, and of course fear. But in order to do that, you need to move faster than them at least a little bit. So I find this quite useful in most situations. Fear you inflict lasts 50% longer. 50% longer, we get an extra tick on fear, and as you've seen, fear ticks for quite a bit of damage at my current condition damage. like I said, since fear, we transform fear into a double-edged weapon, it improves both defensively and offensively, so never go anywhere without Master of Terror. So far we're looking good. We can counter, we can stack bleeds really high because of the basic damage rotation. We have counters against direct damage, we have counters against condition damage. We only have one counter against control effects, and this is on a 90-second cooldown. So if they get smart, if people get a little bit smart and they don't break the initial focus, or if they outnumber you and they don't have to break the initial focus, they can go after you again and still have enough numbers to go after your team members, then you're dead. Then you are dead. Unless you have stability. Unless you have 3 seconds of stability every 10 seconds, and every 10 seconds you can add stability and lose one condition. Oh, and I almost forgot, gain spectral armor at 50% health, so basically we have protection. So we have 2 ways of adding protection, we have 3 ways of adding weakness, we have 4 ways of dealing with conditions, we have 2 ways of dealing with control effects, and we have control effects of our own. We have 1 fear, 2nd fear, 3rd fear, knockdown, which is another control effect, and possibly another fear. So that's potential 4 fears and 1 knockdown, enough to make it count. So basically this is my way of covering all the principles of PvP, like maybe you've seen them in breaking down PvP, while maintaining really high damage, as you've seen in the rotation, in the damage rotation and playstyle, while satisfying the circumstance and the principle of the wall v wall meta. Last thing we need to take a look at is the actual gear, because there's a small catch here as well. The gear is Rabbit. The gear has Rabbit stats across the board, and we know Rabbit has precision, toughness and condition damage. Precision, we know from the PvE guide, is used in bleed stacking because of bard precision. Toughness is used to counter direct damage, and we know we are going to encounter a lot of direct damage. We know we don't need any more ways of dealing with conditions. We have 4 ways of dealing with conditions, and the Death Shroud can absorb a lot of condition damage, so direct damage is still going to be a bit more present. So we need the toughness to mitigate direct damage, and besides, the Necromancer has a high health pool by default, so we have basically the perfect balance between countering conditions and countering direct damage. And of course condition damage is our primary stat, needed to do a lot of damage, as you've seen in the rotation. So precision, toughness, condition damage across the board. And superior sigil of earth, 60% chance on critical to inflict bleeding, stacks with bard precision. We have 48 critical strike chance, close to the 50% critical strike chance, which is optimum, like I discussed. Some people will move so fast, will dodge so much that you can't really hit with the skills that require a casting time, so you're going to be stuck on auto attacks for a little while until you can perform the combo, like I said, and then stacking bleeds really hard is going to be really beneficial in those scenarios. Superior sigil of corruption, gains 10 condition damage every time you kill a foe. You're going to kill many foes. You're going to kill many foes with all the AoEs you have. So this is the sigil that I highly recommend. So you can get to 1738 condition damage. For my staff, superior sigil of geomancy. There are certain circumstances in which you don't have a chance to do auto attacks, you don't have a chance to do anything, you're going to get rushed. So basically all you can do is go immediately into Death Shroud to remove maybe some immobilize, also gain some stability. You've seen the Death Shroud combo, and then when you switch, you basically add some more stacks of condition, which favors burst stacking. So it's really important, and you're already switched, so you can continue with some fear, you can counter some more condition stacking. It's really wonderful. It goes with the overall build. Last but not least, we have Superior Rune of the Mad King. Superior Rune of the Mad King, power, condition duration and bleeding duration. Also the 6th skill summons ravens to attack nearby enemies when you activate an elite skill. 45-second cooldown. 45-second cooldown. The golem is 40-second cooldown. So every time you use the golem, you're going to have ravens that do damage on nearby targets. Here's the catch. Here's the catch. The ravens, every time they crit, they apply bleeding stacks. I had ravens that applied up to 5 stacks of bleeding on the target. So that's mental, that's just mental. On top of that we have bleeding duration and condition duration, so we have 25 overall bleeding duration from the runes. That combined with a 40% condition duration from Koi Cakes, we are at 65% bleeding duration, exactly half, exactly how I planned it, exactly what we need to stack half the maximum of 25 stacks of condition on the target. But because of the shortcut, because of the damaging rotation, we can go more than that in a shorter period of time. It's not sustained, it's burst stacking, and it's really useful to counter any healing, to counter most cleansing abilities, because sometimes you can actually stack faster than they can cleanse, especially if you use CCs, especially if you use different methods, so they waste their cleansing abilities. Don't think you're going to be able to defeat anyone. If someone is built towards countering you, you're going to have a really hard time. But the thing is, whoever is going to build against full conditions, to counter condition builds heavily, it's going to counter you heavily, but you're running with a team, and the team is going to have some bursting elements in the composition, and the bursting guy can take care of that minor annoyance. Last piece of the puzzle, potent master tuning crystal, gain condition damage equal to 5% of your toughness. We have 48 critical strike chance, almost 2800 armor, 18,000, 19,000 HP, and 1734 condition damage, and life force pool increased by 30%, which does matter. We have the ability to burst stack insanely, we have the ability to counter direct damage, we have the ability to counter condition damage, we have the ability to do everything except roam, and I explained what roaming is, so find yourself a small roaming party and start owning them. So that's about it. Last thing I'm going to show you guys is, you know, I spent like 5 days running around WvW. After I made the build, I wanted to field test it. I was like lurking around some areas in WvW, and apparently word got around that there's this crazy necromancer that keeps killing people. So I met some people. They were like they started with one. He tried to dodge me, he couldn't. Then I went after him. He met up with someone else, and then they both started running away from me, and both of them met with someone else, and and now I was chasing 3 people. It was a really awesome experience. Me running after 3 players, it was awesome. So I literally just finished editing this one. A lot of work went into it, a lot of thought process. Took me a while to realize how I'm going to be able to split the information in such a way that I can refer to it at a later date if I want to make another PvP guide, and also if something changes in the future I can just make another video and use the link in the menu to link to the updated version of that particular field of interest. So lots of work, but I managed to do it. I rushed a bit at the end when it came down to the actual build. You can copy me, you can it's not a problem. I didn't explain, I explained from a different way. I wanted to demonstrate that when it comes to people and environments, you have to make a build in such a way that you satisfy the conditions of the environment, in this case the WvW meta, and the fundamentals of PvP, because it's really important. The build is more or less, like I said, the build creates itself, but it's more important to understand why it functions like this, so you can make your own decisions in the future, and if not, just to use it properly. That's my intention. So yeah, you guys haven't heard from me in a long while, but I had a lot of stuff to do. I'm leaving the country tomorrow. I'm actually leaving the country tomorrow, and there were a lot of things I wanted to take care of before I leave. And I wanted to make this video, and like I said, 5 days of work plus 5 days of... at least I worked on this at least for 2 weeks. Because, yeah, I had to take breaks and stuff. 2 weeks, but I hope it's worth it. All the information that I provided, unless the game gets scrapped and we get something totally new, it's going to stay relevant in time. Besides, I'm going to update all the minor modifications. So tomorrow I'm leaving the country, but once I get back I'm going to make part 2 of this video. Speaking of that, I'm looking for some Berserker Necromancers to help me with that video. I'm going to give them the build up front. We're going to have a lot of fun in big Zergs. It's going to be amazing. What else? I want to thank some people. I forgot their names now. I'm really tired, I'm sorry. Some people made some small donations, and I decided... It's complicated. I refused donations for a long period of time because of some principles, but eventually I accepted once, twice, 3 times, 5 times donations from people, and each one of the person, I mean almost all the people that donated, and some other people said that I should make it easier for people. A lot of more people would want to support me. If I just make it easier for them, I should add a donation button on my main channel. So I did that now because at this point, yeah, I already accepted. So yeah, anyway. In the coming months I want to get an SSD drive for better loading screens. I want to get the capture card for higher quality on stream. I'm planning on streaming once I get back, and the second monitor so I can talk with you bastards. So I can talk with you bastards while I'm streaming, so I can answer you in real time. So yeah, that's about it. I'm in a rush even right now, but until next time, subscribe, rate, favorite, share, do whatever you want, and leave in the comments below your opinion and your feedback on my way of explaining PvP, this aspect of PvP. If anything, if I left anything out, if you don't agree with something, just put all your thoughts in the comments. Go wild. But yeah, until I get back, enjoy gaming and have a great day.